Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating, centuries-old debates in human history. It's this incredibly profound question that has sparked endless discussion, drawn deep dividing lines, and literally shaped the entire landscape of historical theology. The question itself is pretty simple, but the answer? Well, it's incredibly complex. When it comes to salvation, who exactly does the saving? Is it entirely God, entirely man, or is it some kind of combination of the two? We're going to act as your guide today, looking closely at the source material to demystify some of this theological jargon and see how history's greatest thinkers tackled this very question.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp these concepts, we need a good mental picture. The 19th century American evangelist Charles Finney came up with a brilliant thought experiment that just perfectly frames our entire discussion. Imagine for a second that you fall into the raging Niagara River. You're swept up, rapidly heading right for the falls. On the shore stands a rescuer, representing God. In this intense life-or-death moment, who makes the move? Who is ultimately responsible for the rescue? How you instinctively answer that question actually places you directly into one of the major theological camps we're going to explore today. So here is our historical roadmap to help guide us through these epic intellectual bouts. First, we'll look at the river rescue metaphor. Second, mapping the theological spectrum. Third, round 1, Augustine versus Pelagius. Fourth, the prevenient grace middle ground. And fifth, round 2, Luther versus Erasmus. Section 1, the river rescue metaphor. Taking Finney's Niagara River analogy, theologians have historically fallen into one of 4 really distinct rescue scenarios. In the first view, which is associated with Pelagius, the person in the water is fully capable. They just swim to the shore completely alone, under their own power. In the second view, known as semi-Pelagianism, the swimmer realizes they're in serious trouble and they have to make the first move by yelling out for help. Then God responds and pulls them in. The third view is semi-Augustinianism. Here, God makes the first move, reaching out to the swimmer, but the swimmer must actively grab hold of that hand to be saved. And finally, in strict Augustinianism, the person in the water is effectively unconscious. They're spiritually dead. They can't do anything at all. God literally jumps into the water, grabs them, and pulls them to safety entirely on his own. Section 2, mapping the theological spectrum. Now, what's really interesting about this is how we translate that river metaphor into formal historical terms. Let's look at the absolute extreme ends of our spectrum first. We have a concept called monergism. The prefix mono just means one. So in a monergistic system, salvation is the work of one party working completely 100% alone. If the swimmer swims to shore entirely on their own, well, that's human monergism. If the swimmer is totally unconscious and God does all of the rescuing, that's divine monergism. It's one party acting completely alone. Now, contrast that extreme with the middle ground, which is called synergism. The prefix syn means together. In a synergistic framework, salvation involves God and humans working together cooperatively. The effort is shared. Neither party does it completely alone. There's a real collaborative interaction happening between divine grace and human will. Notice how those 4 camps from our river metaphor fit absolutely perfectly into these distinct categories. Pelagianism is a human monergism, right? The human moves first and works alone. On the exact opposite end, Augustinianism is a divine monergism. God moves first and works alone. But look at the 2 middle views, semi-Pelagianism and semi-Augustinianism. Both of these are forms of synergism because God and humans are working together. The main differentiator between them is simply who makes the very first move. Does the human cry out first, or does God reach out first? This taxonomy provides a fantastic lens to view our first historical heavyweight bout. Section 3, Round 1, Augustine versus Pelagius. We're traveling back to the early 5th century now, setting the stage for a massive clash of worldviews. And the spark that ignited this whole conflict was actually a specific prayer written by Aurelius Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo. He wrote, "Command what you will, O Lord, and grant what you command." Now, when the British monk and moralist Pelagius arrived in Rome in 405 AD, he was just utterly shocked by the dreadful moral condition of the city's professed Christians. And when he heard them reciting Augustine's prayer, literally asking God to grant them the ability to obey his commands, Pelagius was deeply offended. He sincerely believed that this specific theology was giving people an excuse to sin. To Pelagius, if God commands something, humans must inherently possess the ability to do it, without needing any special grant of ability. This led to a really stark contrast in their teachings. Augustine drew heavily from his own dramatic conversion and his deep sense of personal sin. He argued for the doctrine of original sin. This is the idea that all humanity inherited guilt and a corrupted nature from Adam, leaving us in a state of total inability. Because of that, God's effective, sovereign grace is absolutely required to save us. Pelagius, on the other hand, completely denied this. He argued that Adam was merely a bad example. According to Pelagius, absolute human responsibility dictates that we inherently possess the absolute free choice to choose good or evil. We are all essentially our own Adam.
Augustine absolutely did not take this challenge lightly. Over the next 2 decades, from 412 to 429 AD, he systematically published treatise after treatise, heavily escalating his intellectual counterattack. He formalized his monergistic doctrine, firmly establishing the argument that unsaved people are completely unable to contribute anything to their salvation. He argued that even the faith they exercise is entirely a gift from God.
This debate raged like wildfire for 20 years, finally culminating at the Ecumenical Council of Ephesus in 431 AD. The church officially sided with Augustine and explicitly condemned the human monergism of Pelagius. But here's the catch. While Pelagius was condemned, the broader church didn't universally adopt the strict, absolute divine determinism of Augustine either. Folk theology still wrestled constantly with the tension between feeling like we have free will and believing in an all-powerful God. It's a universal human struggle, and it leads us directly to a really fascinating theological middle ground.
Section 4. The Prevenient Grace Middle Ground. So how do you solve the tension between total human inability and the biblical calls for humans to believe and repent? Well, the brilliant answer for many was a concept called prevenient grace. The word prevenient literally means to come before or preceding. Championed later by major thinkers like Jacob Arminius and John Wesley, this doctrine agrees with Augustine that humans are fallen and cannot save themselves. But it argues that God extends a universal preceding grace to all humanity that neutralizes that total inability. This grants humans what's called gracious ability, which is a restored freedom to either accept or reject the gospel. It's practically the glue holding synergism together, ensuring that God still makes the very first move, but the human response remains totally meaningful.
Section 5. Round 2. Luther versus Erasmus. Let's move forward and see how this builds.
Jumping forward to the 16th century Protestant Reformation for our second heavyweight bout, we meet Desiderius Erasmus, the incredibly famous Dutch humanist. Initially, Erasmus actually supported the Augustinian monk Martin Luther in his critiques of church abuses, but in 1524, Erasmus broke ranks. He published a book called On the Freedom of the Will. Erasmus argued for a synergism where human free choice was heavily damaged by sin, sure, but not completely extinguished. Luther, who believed firmly in the absolute bondage of the human will, was absolutely furious. He wrote a direct, scathing attack in response, arguing that absolute free will does exist, but only God possesses it. Luther was definitely not subtle in his critique. He completely juxtaposed these two worldviews. He labeled synergistic views as a theology of glory. According to Luther, if humans contribute even a tiny, microscopic bit of cooperative will to their salvation, it exalts human accomplishment and makes room for human pride. Instead, Luther fiercely championed the theology of the cross, a pure monergism. He argued that the cross highlights utter, total human helplessness. We can do literally nothing to save ourselves, therefore God receives absolutely all of the glory. For Luther, any hint of synergism completely robbed the cross of its true power. You see, this debate over human will and divine grace isn't just some abstract academic exercise. It has literally driven the theology of the church for over a millennium and a half. From Augustine and Pelagius all the way to Luther and Erasmus, these brilliant minds have wrestled with the exact mechanics of our rescue, which leaves us with a profound, lingering question to ponder for ourselves today. In the deep, beautiful mystery of salvation, do we ultimately choose, or are we exclusively chosen? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.